For over 25 years, Berta Medicus and I shared a life together and a wonderful son, Martin. In this conversation, we revisit the early days of our journey, the evolution of our spiritual lives, and the moments that shaped who we are today. It's a conversation full of joy, reflection, and stories you won't want to miss. I'm grateful to Berta for her honesty, humor, and heart. Here's our conversation. Berta, I'm so glad you could spend this time with me today. I know you've had a long and varied and serious spiritual background, and I think hearing about your life and the transitions you've made and the thinking behind it and the destiny behind it will be of interest and help to others. So let's start at the beginning. I know that you were born in Germany, but you came to America at age 2, I believe.
Yes.
And you were raised by your mother as a serious Christian.
Yes.
And I remember once you declared yourself born again.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that part of your background?
Well, the born again part was a matter of use because it wasn't terminology I was brought up with. My mother was raised a Lutheran. The church we went to was Trinity United Church of Christ, and we went to that church because the minister spoke German. He didn't preach in German, but it was another way of sort of connecting. But I had been to some, I don't even remember with whom, a friend to some kind of, probably it was just one of those tent gatherings. Anyhow, the minister talked about being born again and what it meant and that one should come up and accept Christ as your Savior. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. And I did it and sort of expected some kind of reaction, within myself. And I was pleased, but I can't say that I got a reaction. But that, I did.
And you remember the event?
Yes. But I was pretty young.
Now, eventually we'll talk about more details of the unified path, body, mind, heart, and soul. But I remember a story you told about your confirmation.
So I went through confirmation class and had various, one could say, arguments with the minister about animals and heaven and that kind of thing. Animals have always been very important to me and very much part of my soul. Anyhow, so he was presenting the confirmation class to the congregation. And with each child that or each student that he presented, he had picked out a very nice Bible verse that he said that he had picked out specifically for that student. And they were all, sort of inspiring, nice verses. And when it became my turn, my verse was, "The mind is willing, but the body is weak." And my mother was horrified. And even now, I'm in my 70s, and I still feel that cross to bear because I think he was right, obviously, on some level. And I don't like it.
Well, the body is an important part of our
I know.
whole self.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I know later you left Christianity.
Well,
you can tell us that you didn't turn your back on it.
no.
But
But it's a beautiful story.
well, you did that in order to become part of a Sufi circle.
Yes.
Tell us that story.
I got to meet Sheikh Isa, as we called him.
This was the senior sheikh of the Sufi order.
Yes. And I'm assuming I can tell where he lived. He was in Switzerland, in Lausanne. And I got to go and meet him, which was important to me because I wanted to feel that I was doing this for the right reason, not just because of my relationship with you. And when I finally got to be in his presence, he spoke to me in German, which was his native tongue. And so there was something very kind and familiar, And he asked me if I had any questions. And after some tears, because it was a momentous occasion for me to be in his presence, and I finally said, I have this feeling that I am deserting Christ, and I don't want to do that. And Sheikh Isa very kindly solved that for me by saying, and he said this in German, but I'll translate, Christ will not rebuke you when he sees you in paradise. He said, if you had become a Buddhist or perhaps another religion, he might say, why do you go to the Buddha when you had me? But in Islam, you go directly to God. You do not go through an intermediary. You pray and you come directly to God. And he said, Christ wants nothing more from you than that. And that cut that Gordian knot for me and gave me peace. And I never felt I had left Christ. And I was very grateful for that. It meant all the difference. It made all the difference for me.
You also got to know him and his wife, and I know you spent several months with them, helping them with their home.
Yes.
And also got to know other seniors in the Sufi circle, including Martin Lings and Titus Burkhardt.
Yes.
How did that affect your life?
You get to know the spiritual elders, so to speak, of this group.
Of course.
And see them on a very, more of a day-to-day perspective. And it was beautiful, and it was uplifting, and it was...
it reaffirmed.
Yes, and it was, for me, it was heartwarming to get to see them on a more intimate level like that. I'll never forget being at a dinner before a majlis, and Sheikh Isa was waiting for Titus Burkhardt to come. He didn't want to start the meal until he arrived because he knew he was coming. He had been traveling from Morocco. And so then he came. It wasn't that late anyway. But he was very apologetic, but when he saw Sheikh Isa, this beatific smile just came across his face, and he and Sheikh Isa hugged. They just warmly embraced. They were two old friends.
Yes.
They had been friends in school. And there was something so beautiful getting to see that, because it was this intimate view,
And very human.
Yes, yes.
And also these men, Schuon and Lings and Burkhardt, they were great intellectuals, great scholars, and great authors.
Yeah.
And
I was always so impressed. Here were these men that had gone to school together and knew each other, knew all of their ins and outs. And when Sheikh Isa became a sheikh, these men who had been his equals unanimously came to him as their guide.
they recognized.
Yes. And I found that, of course it was wonderful what Sheikh Isa had accomplished, but I found that humility and intelligence was just remarkable, that his followers were so united in supporting him and recognizing that. And that sort of lack of ego, one could say. I was just so moved by that.
Yes, and it wasn't just the fact that he had so much knowledge, but he had presence.
Oh, yeah.
That was palpable.
Yes, yes. When I met you and you were sharing with me the things you had learned and were still learning, and then I learned what your Islamic name was.
Because I was already part of this
Yes.
Sufi order.
And it was a journey, and one that you handled so very well, to guide me quietly along to get to the point where I could make this transition. But when I learned the name, that your name meant, Al-Bashir, bringer of good news, and that you have been all of my life.
Well, thank you. I guess it's worth noting that when the Sufi circle chose a name for you, the name they chose was Bahia, which is radiant and joyful, and I think that's very appropriate too.
Oh, well, the name meant something, and it's still dear to my heart. When I heard that you were working on the unified path, once again I had that warm feeling in my heart. Here's some more good news.
I think the unified path is good news,
yes,
for everyone.
Yes.
Now, one of the things you mentioned was animals, and your life with animals, and I know you live on a farm now.
Yes.
And how have animals been part of your life and your development and your connection with that which is transcendent?
For me, animals were just so much a part of my heart and soul. They spoke to me in their beings, you know. My mother was a city girl. My father lived in the country, but my mother loved nature and animals, but lived in the city. So when my parents married and came to America and had this little farm, it started out with 5 acres. So they got pigs and they got chickens and they got geese and they got cows. And they were all part of the family, you know.
Right. Your father was a physicist.
Yes. Yeah. Plasma physicist. And he was brought in what was called Operation Paperclip.
Yes.
And it was this magical growing up with all these wonderful animals. And in Germany, there's a legend that on Christmas Eve, the animals can talk. And as a child, I clung to that. And I used to go to the barn and just sort of hang around and hoping, you know, because it just seemed so wonderful, the idea of literally being able to communicate. And of course, in time, as you grow up with animals, there's a kind of communication that occurs anyway. You learn some of the body language and the eye movements and the various things. Oh, and my sister, well, there were 5 of us children, but my sister and I were 2 years apart. We were the closest. Before we got horses, which was a little later when we were living there, but initially we would ride our cows. And
cows?
Yes, I mean, you know, they were, when there are a lot of people around, almost any animal becomes pretty tame if you spend enough time with it. And they, you know, put up with us. And
What were some of the more exotic animals you grew up with?
Well, we grew up with all kinds. Well, and remember, this was in the 50s when you could still get exotic animals in pet shops. And not that we supported, because it was always a difficult capture to get animals. You know, animals died, a lot of animals died before the live one appeared in the pet shop. But once you were faced with that live one that you knew you could give a better home to than the little cage it was in the pet shop, you know, it was hard to make that decision. Do I leave this or do I somehow support that? And I'm very glad that you can no longer get monkeys and all sorts of exotics in pet shops. But we had, well, 2 things. My mother raised poodles, miniature poodles. And she always had an ad out, poodles sell or trade. Well, she traded 2 poodles for a woolly monkey. And so my mother named him Poo Poo because he was traded for 2 poodles. And when he was young, it was a little male. When he was young, he was a wonderful pet. I mean, he was lively and interesting. But the problem was, and this we didn't know, when he became mature, he saw all the women in the house as his harem and all the men in the house as his competitors. And he only would obey my father. And then one day, finally, he challenged him. And it was just a horrible experience because they had a literal fight. I mean, he bit my father very terribly. They had huge canines. He was this beautiful, healthy, beautiful monkey. South American, prehensile tail, brown, sweet, sweet face. I mean, anybody who looks up woolly monkeys, they're beautiful. But anyhow, then we found out that Columbus Zoo had a healthy woolly monkey population. So we brought him to the Columbus Zoo, and they were delighted to have this healthy male monkey, but he didn't want the other monkeys because he'd been raised with people. So it was but then years later, when I was able to drive, when I was a teenager, I found a little female in a pet store called Noah's Ark, and I took my mother to see her, and I knew that was, my mom wasn't going to leave this little monkey in this cage in this pet store. So we had Samantha, and she was this sweet, dear little soul that I grew up with. And she was a member of the family. She ate at the table with us. She never was in a cage. When it was time to eat, I'd call out the door, "Samantha, komm zum Essen," which means come eat. And you'd hear somewhere in the yard, this chirp. And she'd come up to the door, and we'd let her in. And she had a little step ladder next to my father's chair. She had her own little plate.
You had a plate at the table?
Yeah. And she learned all. My father, if something was, she ate what we ate, and if something was hot, my father would say, "Heiß," and then he'd blow on it. And then little Samantha would stick her little lips out. Anyhow, and we had a lot of poodles. She learned that if there was something she didn't want, all she'd have to do is sort of brush it aside, and the dogs would eat it all. Because my father had the same rules for her. She didn't get more until she'd eaten what she already had. So she learned if she got rid of that, she could get more of what she wanted. But anyhow, Samantha was a real part of my heart.
Well, that kind of interaction and communication with creatures is wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there a particular spiritual story that would come to mind about your experience with animals and their connection with you and with each other?
When Heidi and I were teenagers, we had some horses. And I knew then that if you had the time and you spent the time with a horse and rode it a significant amount of time, a real bond could occur. And I had that bond with our Arabian stallion, Royal. And it was wonderful. And then many years later, we had a horse born on the farm named Shawnee. And I named her that because I was reading, well, it doesn't matter. I was reading a book about Tecumseh. Anyhow, so Shawnee was born on April 17th, but it was the year before Martin was born. So they shared a birthday, but Shawnee was a year older. And we had Shawnee a long time, but when she was in her 20s, she had a neurodegenerative disease that's caused by a toxin, and it caused her to be very unstable and fall. And I won't go into the long vet story, but she'd had a fall and it was hard to get her back up, and I was holding her. The vet didn't know how this could be treated. And I'd been holding her and she'd been falling, and finally she tore the lead rope out of my hand and went up to see the other two mares in the pasture with her. And I followed her and I saw her do this. She went up to each mare, put her nose to their nose, and nickered, and just nickered quietly and talked. And when she was done with the one, she went to the other one and nickered, and they had their noses together. And then I reached out and got her lead rope again, and she started to circle. And then she fell, and she died. And I was so grateful that I was there, that I saw it, and I knew what I saw. and that she wasn't alone, that I was there when she died, and I was able to be patting her and talking to her.
And she had said goodbye to her friends.
And she said goodbye to her herd mates. And it was absolutely true that that's what she did. Because I'd had her by herself down there where there wasn't any, she couldn't hurt herself by falling. It was a soft and rock-free spot. And she pulled away and went to them on purpose because she knew what was coming. And I swear, I know she said to them, "It'll be all right. I'll be all right." I was so glad I was there.
Yeah, you mentioned Martin. What has motherhood done for your outlook of devotion and service and connection?
It's increased my gratitude so many-fold. Martin is a real gift. And we were spared so many trials. Martin is healthy, he's intelligent, he's loving. He still likes to spend time with his parents. What a gift. I mean, gratitude, there's always something to be grateful for.
Oh, indeed. Now, looking back at your spiritual life, you've been through so many transitions. What's been constant for you? What's been preserved your identity and belief?
The gratitude is all, and it's funny because in a way that comes from, well, partly from the German upbringing. You're crying? I'll give you something to cry about, because my parents didn't suffer the kind of lazy moodiness that kids can go through. And it caused a kind of inward thinking and self-reliance, but gratitude on so many levels, and experiences with my mother. Again, the animals. My mother had bought for my father a chameleon, actually several chameleons, the African chameleons. And my father loved them dearly, and he loved them so.
The African chameleons are the ones with independent eyes.
Oh yeah, they independent, and those funny little feet where they're 3 toes on one side and 2 toes on the other, and they move slowly. He had one chameleon, must have been Nova. Anyhow, my father would put her on a stick and point her at the window with flies on it, and she saw the fly, she'd zap out and get it, and it pleased my father so much. She was this living fly swatter. And so he'd let her, or whichever one he had at the time, outside in the summer where there'd be a flowering bush, and the chameleon would eat the insects, but it was a chameleon, and when it was time to bring it in, we couldn't find it.
That's because it was a chameleon.
Yes, it turned into whatever she was around. And my mother would always, because she'd have us all looking, and we're all thinking, and then my mother would say a prayer to ask that we find this chameleon, so my father's heart wouldn't break that he'd lost the chameleon. And always, as soon as she said the prayer, we'd find the chameleon. Once it was on my mother's apron. Once it, whoever, because we were always out there looking. Anyhow, we'd find the chameleon. But she always told my father, you can't let them just go out there. We're going to lose them one day. And finally, the last time they got lost, she felt like it was tempting fate, and she couldn't bring herself to say the prayer, and we never got the chameleon back. but there's a spiritual lesson there from my mother's point of view. I always thought she should have said the prayer.
Well, I know that prayer has always been part of your spiritual life, but
yes.
But looking at the elements of the unified path, body, mind, heart, and soul,
yes.
What currently are you doing in terms of these elements?
Well, I'm ignoring the body more than I should.
There's a lesson there, I'm
yes,
sure.
Yes, and my inner commitment is to change that, and I will. But the meditation is very comforting, very soothing, very
That's
resettling.
the soul element.
Yes.
That's the connection with being and the transcendence.
Yes.
You have a special place at home, yes?
Yes. And that is a place, it's just a room that's dedicated to, it can be an extra bedroom if one is so, if need be, but it is the prayer room. And it's quiet, it's peaceful, it's meditative.
This is where you go to meditate.
Yes. And the thing I find delightful, even Martin has said, sometimes if he's solving a problem or having to do some writing, he's always found that in that room he can get the things done that he needs to get done because there's a peace that comes from that room. And do you remember when our cat was really sick?
Yes.
That was the room he went to.
Yes.
He too found solace and peace.
And connection.
And connection,
presence.
yeah. It's, dare I say, it's somewhat of a magical room. I like that.
Well, you've had such an interesting and varied spiritual journey. What would you advise someone who is just starting or who is interested in changing their life or starting a practice that leads to interior knowledge or
prayer? Certainly I would assume they have some kind of basis of praying to whatever higher power they are aware of. But prayer with the intention of looking for guidance. Because there are these many paths. And every path doesn't work for everybody. It's not for everybody necessarily. But I think one is guided and helped, if one is truly seeking, to find the path that really resonates and gives one the peace and the lessons that the soul needs.
yes, the whole soul, the whole person.
Right.
Body, mind, heart, and soul.
And so they have to, my advice would be, pray and listen. Pray and listen.
It's been wonderful talking to you, and I've really enjoyed hearing these stories, not all of which I knew before. And thank you for spending this time with me.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed remembering some of these things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I'd be interested in your observations and anything you'd like to add. Please leave those in comments below. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, remember, body, mind, heart, soul, one.